Please, everybody accept. Start recording.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes, first of all, thank you very much, Sumaya, for organizing this event for our book project. And also, I am very thankful to the contributors, to the colleagues, to the authors of this book. And I have very short presentation. In fact, I don't want to take your time. And my presentation content is like this. First, I will introduce editor myself, and I will give brief information about the publisher, aim of the book, authors, content, and how to order. Yes. My name is Mevlüt Aydoğmuş, and I have PhD in curriculum and instruction, and I work for Necmettin Erbakan University, Ahmet Keleşoğlu Education Faculty in the Department of Curriculum and Instruction here in Konya. You can see the logo of my university, and the next image is the symbol of our city. Maybe you saw images like this before, and there is a famous scholar, Mevlana Celaleddin Rumi, and my hometown, Konya, is his hometown, and they are also known as whirling dervishes around the world. And I have been dealing with the curriculum design in my department, and I have been teaching and providing teacher education, and I am also dealing with international educational projects, and up to now we have carried out some project with some of the authors of this book also. Currently we have school dropouts project, and here you can see a link, iconmas.net, and this is the conference page of our project, and it will happen in June here in Konya. And if you are interested, maybe we can come together physically. And I am also editor of two educational journals. One is JiaBin and the other is JESMA. And publisher of the book is Palette Publication, and Palette Publication is national international publishing house, and they started in 2005, and up to now they have around 800 publications. And what can we say about the book? It is a peer-reviewed book that scientifically questions, researches, discusses, and presents ideas about the processes of the emerging problems, developments, and changes in the educational systems, concepts, practices, and approaches. Here in this book, we have 22 chapters prepared by 36 authors from 24 universities, institutions from 12 countries. Here we can see the countries of the authors, and half of the authors are from United States, and there are 3 authors from Turkey, Bangladesh, United Kingdom, 2 from Canada, and 1 from United Arab Emirates, China, Germany, Greece, Australia, Saudi Arabia, and Israel. Here we can see the list of the educational institutions of the authors, and the authors are mostly from universities, but there are also some authors from NGOs and private companies. And I have provided a link on my presentation, And on chat box, I will share the link of the presentation. And on the presentation, I have provided a link to content. As there are high number of the chapters, I don't want to take much time by reading all. Here we have a WhatsApp number, and it is possible to send a text to the publisher in order to order books. And I hope very soon it will be available on Amazon also. Yes, thank you very much for your participation. Again, I would like to thank Sumeyye for organizing this event, and I am also very thankful to all of you for your valuable contribution to this book project.
Thank you very much, Mevla. It was a very good description of your book. I would like to invite the authors. We didn't get time to set up who's going to first. Please just raise your hand if you want to go first. If you don't want it, I'm happy to go first. Oh, there's the hands. Sermani, am I right?
It's okay, Somaya. You can go first. I can go after you. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Just share my PowerPoint. Okay, my chapter was about early childhood sociology of education, a case of cultural diversity in Australia. And also I presented this in early childhood, European Early Childhood Conference. I don't know if any of you are familiar or you did present it here. I did TED Talk. And I asked for permission, of course, from Mevla, and he said it's okay. So it was just a talk, and I share this chapter very briefly about in 10 minutes talk. So going with through my introduction, I'm originally from Iran. I studied bachelor and master in psychology. Before moving to Australia, I migrated to Australia in 2007. And I moved from psychology to education here because I couldn't get recognition. It was really difficult in Australia to get recognition as a psychologist. I studied diploma and master and PhD in teaching and education. And at the current time, I'm teaching in University of New England in Armidale. It is, you see in the picture, is a little town. It's a very, very nice town. I would say it's it has the best weather for me because it's close to where I grew up in Iran, in Mashhad. It's the highest point here and 1,000 meters above the sea, and the weather is really nice here. And this is the very old heritage building in University of New England, which now is using by VC. Going through my chapter in the book, this chapter is a lot about focusing on promoting cultural diversity in Australia, especially when I started thinking and doing research about this study. It was all about during COVID-19 pandemic that the whole world experienced the Black Lives Matter movement. The movement occurred across many nations with millions of people attending to rallies and showing their outrage and demanding change from the government. This happened during time when people risked their own life and other health to show their disagreement with their government approach to this problem. How did this movement start and why? And this started in 2013 from the beginning with a little bit of the history in US. After George Zimmerman, a Black teenager, was shot dead by a policeman. It was reignited again in the US when George Floyd, another African-American, was killed by a member of the police force on May 2020 and spread the whole world, including widespread protests in Australia during COVID-19 pandemic. A main driving force was an Australian human rights lawyers and activists called Hannah McLeod. It's from Aboriginal background, Indigenous people, and from the Noongar woman who called for an investigation of 432 Indigenous deaths in custody recorded in Australia in the past 30 years. The protests happened in different states, one after each other in Australia, and the media reported. The Prime Minister was asking people to stop their protests at the impact on their health, since coronavirus impacted a protester from Melbourne a week ago, which means more people may be infected. Despite this type of pressure from government, Australians show their empathy for Indigenous people by protesting and putting their own health and others at risk. The connection between this story and my claim is we need to consider early childhood stage for teaching, valuing diversity, specifically diversity of races, because children are at the center of those interactions. As they are observant, watching media and seeing their parents protest as a protester, they have the right to know and learn about diversity. They are active citizens. And as the researchers explain, they are, sorry, I have to change my slide. They are observant and watching the media. They have the right to know about diversity. They are active citizens, and researchers explain they are at the critical stage when learning to value diversity can influence on the whole life. This requires an intensive investigation on how early childhood teacher and educator value and bring to the fore the diversity in everyday interaction with the children. Researchers by scholars such as Mansouri and Kemp, based in Australia, and Robinson and Johnson found discrimination and inequity toward children from immigrant, Indigenous Australian, and low socioeconomic groups. Specifically, Indigenous Australian and refugee from Asia and Middle East often fail to achieve at the same educational level as the rest of Australian population. There is a further evidence of cultural diversity practice among early childhood services in Australia that cause concern. For example, it was a large study by Pissar and Ebeck in 2000 of nearly 100 South Australian early childhood services found that 38% of the services, in spite of having culturally inclusive policy, they lack culturally appropriate practices. In particular, the early childhood education, staff low confidence has a major influence on whether teachers promote inclusion program between the children. I'm getting to the end. The promotion of diversity will in long run reduce or eliminate the discrimination that led to the Black Lives Matters. So this is, if we start very early, we're not going to end up such a story of like Black Lives Matter, which just happened during pandemic. Teacher can help children in learning and respecting the diversity of other races by carefully preparing the classroom environment. For example, selecting book or poster and images, inviting the families to be more involved with the children's life. A multicultural society such as Australia has a lot more responsibility to teach young children and valuing diversity. Learning about valuing diversity of races is supported by our education system through the policies and teacher preparation and recommendation. That's the end of my my chapters. I'll try to be very brief, but I think it went a bit longer. Yes, please, if you have a question, I don't know if you will leave it for later, or if you have any question, you can just ask me now. Okay, if not any question, do you want to go next ceremony?
Thank you. I know my name is a little difficult to pronounce. Thank you for doing such a good job, Somaye. So I am Srimani Chakravarti. I know it sounds like a complicated name. It's just like Shrek, Shri, and money as in dollars. So don't forget my name. Money as in rupees, dollars, whatever the currency is. So I go by Shri or Shri Mani or Dr. C. That's my least favorite name. I am from Joliet, Illinois, which is close to Chicago. We are about 40 miles west of Chicago. Everything is west of Chicago, I guess, because we have the lake, Michigan Lake, right there. So first of all, thank you, Dr. Idogmas, for this opportunity to write a chapter, and it's heartening to see the collaboration for this book. I mean, it's remarkable to see everybody from different countries. And thank you, Somaye, for arranging a time that can cater to most of us. I guess we got lucky. It's mid-afternoon here, so I appreciate that. A little bit about me. I am originally from India, moved to the US about 25 years ago, as a result of getting married to my husband, who was studying here at that time. I teach at the University of St. Francis, which is a small liberal arts school, private school in Illinois, USA. And I mainly teach special education courses in the undergrad, grad, and I also teach in the doctoral program there. So my chapter was about something I do every day. It's about teacher education and emerging trends in teacher education and diversity. So if any of you are in the Chicagoland area or nearby, I saw many of you nod your heads when I said Joliet. So you probably know where Joliet is, Joliet, Illinois. Please ping me, please email me, and I would love to get in touch with you. Okay. And I'm just can I share my screen? Sorry, I just need a second. I'll be really quick with this. It won't take long. So briefly about my book chapter. So my chapter was, oops, it's not playing. Are you able to see it? Okay. My chapter was titled Emerging Trends in Students in Education for Students with Disabilities, Cultural Linguistic Diversities, and Other Populations. And it basically went over a historic view on how the traditional view on disability and diversity moved to a much broader view on what we consider diversity. So I just mentioned the historic trends, and a lot of our current system of education depends on what we learned as lessons from history. So I thought it was an important backdrop on the contextualization or the philosophical views on how we view diversity or disability around the world. And I apologize, I was approaching it from a Eurocentric, US-centric perspective, because that's where most of my experiences have been. But I try to look at global scenarios on how they viewed diversity and disability too. Then I moved on to redefine what we know about diversity as we know it. So one of the important things that comes out from the chapter, it's a theoretical chapter. It was not a research-based chapter, but it basically it examined views on teacher education, which changed according to trends noted in history about what we know about brain development, what we know about diversity, what we know about disability. And over the years, we have seen that our definition of diversity and diverse needs and what we consider diverse have evolved and changed. For example, we didn't know much about the brain science behind trauma-informed teaching, or as Somaye suggested, the cultural responsive teaching was introduced, and we thought we knew a lot about it. But as we move forward, we realized that we didn't know as much, and we try to keep revisiting it. So these are some of the categories of diversity that we narrowly viewed, and then we moved up to diversity, which included neurodiversity, which included characteristics of students. So over a long time, we have known that the techniques we use for teaching students with disabilities can be applicable to most other neurodiverse students too. Same thing with cultural linguistic diversity. I mean, some of the things that we are doing in the US, and Somaye said they're using it all across the world in Australia. And we have to come together for a common understanding of what is it that we want to teach and what is it that we want to tell our teachers who are going to be teachers in the field. So we using the trends we see in teaching for teaching students with disabilities, teaching students who are culturally, linguistically diverse, teaching students who have undergone trauma, teaching students who are socioeconomically diverse. If we can draw from these four major strands of knowledge and skills that we know, we can come to a model for learning that we can use for our teacher education. And this was the model that I discussed in the chapter, kind of arriving in it and looking at evidence-based practices for each of these areas and the overlap between them, right? Even now in the US, we have different streams of preparation. We have streams of preparation for culturally, linguistically diverse teachers, streams of preparation for special education teachers, streams of difference. And now we are introducing trauma-informed, but I think we would be using our resources very efficiently if we could narrow it down and make it into a confluence of these aspects. So that was what the topic of my chapter was.
That was really great. Thank you very much. I think sort of same along with my study as well.
Absolutely.
Very good model that you developed. It's very good. Thank you. For the next person, sorry, this is really hard. There you go. Theodore, please. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I should go ahead just because Srimani, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. So if I'm mutilating it, my apologies. So generally, let me follow your presentation by the virtue that you are in special ed and I'm also in special ed. And I'm Theodore Teresa. I'm an instructor here at Wayne State University in Detroit, Michigan. And my area of specialization is special education, but I've expanded my view of how I look at disabilities. I also do disability studies, and that's why I'm a critical scholar. Well, my chapter, generally, I don't have a PowerPoint, but I'll just give a brief overview of my chapter. So my chapter is on disability and media literacy education and the empowerment of people with disabilities. So generally what I'm sharing in this chapter, I already have my book, so I can refer to it anyway. So the way I'm presenting my ideas in this chapter, generally I'm talking about how the media has historically constructed people with disabilities. And let me also confess that I'm also coming from a Eurocentric perspective, just by the virtue that I was writing this chapter, very much informed by American presentations of people with disabilities in the media throughout the history, although it has undergone a lot of transformation in that in the 1800s, 1900s, all the way to the late 1970s, most of the presentations were relatively freak kind of presentation of people with disabilities. However, that has changed dramatically, especially in the last 20 years, especially as there has been an increased awareness of disability rights movement and the enactment of disability laws that actually has changed the way people with disabilities are being presented in the media. So, but generally what I'm discussing in this chapter is that despite that transformation from the deficit perspective to the strength perspective, the media still employs certain fallacies in the presentation of people with disabilities. And I want just to give a quick overview here. Some of the media that I was looking at were the major television shows in America. For instance, we have the Good Doctor, for instance, is shown in ABC. We have other, in 2012, we had another one in Fox, Atypical. So Atypical was in Fox, if I may not be confusing, either in Fox or yeah, in Fox or Netflix. So we have those transformation in that we have many images of people with disabilities in the media, but in a positive trend. And nonetheless, what I'm discussing in this paper is that there is fallacies related with that, in that there is a danger when you portray things, when you do a lot of a positive side of it, because all of a sudden it obfuscates the realities of other individuals. So as much as the media is doing is somehow engaging in correcting the traditional perspectives of people with disabilities that were fomented in the 1800s, 1900s, all of a sudden it's playing a major role in transformation of people by the virtue that it's a major attitude changer. Nonetheless, by over-focusing on the positive side of people with autism, for example, it's somehow erasing the idea that even within the disability community, there is a lot of heterogeneity. It's not a homogeneous group. So that's what I'm relating with in this chapter. I guess that's in summary. Thank you.
Excellent summary. Thank you very much. Very short, but we got to know about your chapter really well. Thank you for explaining this. We have lots that going next. Thank you.
Yeah, great if it's possible, because maybe it makes like a line from Srimani to Theodota to our chapter, because we are also dealing with people with disability, digital skills, media literacy, but more from a real practical point of view, training point of view. So I will share my presentation. Do you see the presentation now? Did I share the right screen? Great. So our chapter is called Digital Skills for People with Disability, and it's about a concept for practice-oriented, blended online and face-to-face training for professionals working on digital inclusion and disability work. What do I have for you today? I will tell a little bit about myself, the authors, and the organization. Then, of course, what the chapter is about, mainly about the motivation, background, and context, and a little bit overview of the chapter. And as this is a training concept, we already have some practical experiences, so I can share a little bit of our first insights. And in the end, I want to sell this chapter to you by telling you what's in it for you. So let's start with the author. Unfortunately, my colleague Marcus cannot be here today because he's ill. Marcus and me worked together for a long time. Marcus studied education, psychology, sociology in Frankfurt. Then he spent some time in managerial and executive positions in education, social services, and healthcare. And in the 90s, he was active in internal and external consultant of organizational change processes. And since 2001, he was a founder and also a research associate at EurekaNet, which I will tell a little bit about later, and where I'm also a member of the scientific staff. And Marcus and me, we both also worked at Saxion University of Applied Sciences in the Netherlands in the Department of Social Work. Marcus mostly focused on management and research, and I had some parts in development and research. I also did a PhD on blended, web-based, and face-to-face addiction treatment. So this is a little bit about a background. And our organizational background is EurekaNet. It's a small institute in Germany, founded in 2000. And we have project areas like lifelong learning, children, youth and young adults, gender and diversity, future of work, healthcare, and civic engagement. And the institute is more like a multi-professional network structure, and we mostly do project-based work. But on the other hand, Marcus and me were also affiliated with universities. But what we contributed to this book was a concept for training, so really hands-on information. It's not a big theoretical piece. The motivation for this chapter was, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic, which brought digitalization up more than ever. And the background is a recent study in Germany about digital participation of people with disabilities. And one of the conclusions of this study was that future training of professionals in disability care is needed. So what we address with this training is not the people with disabilities themselves, but the professionals that work with them. And a part of the context that was that there was a specific request for continuing training from a regional provider of care services. So we also got we brought an offer to them. And finally, we came up with this kind of in-house training, which is described in this chapter. And a little walk through the chapter. Of course, in the chapter, we line out the introduction and context, and then we describe the objectives of the training. For example, that the professionals learn to work with people with disabilities using digital technology by acquiring technical knowledge and about hardware and software is one of the training objectives. The training is aiming at educational and care professionals that work directly with people with disabilities with a qualification level 4 or higher. This is referring to the European qualification framework. So they usually have not below a bachelor degree, these people we are aiming at. And we combine several didactic approaches. So we have situated learning in this training, we have problem-based learning, we have self-directed learning, we have enhanced discovery learning, we have cognitivist learning. And we also combine various forms of work that are used in the training, in-house seminars, online meetings, individual assignments, individual coaching, group assignments, group consulting. And in the heart of the chapter, you find a really in-detailed list of all the activities, a time schedule, the workload for the participants. And finally, we conclude the chapter with a discussion like a SWOT analysis of the strengths and weaknesses, opportunities and threats of this training concept. So really hands-on information. If you would like to do some kind of these trainings, like an in-house training, I think this can really come handy. As we are already doing this, we have some first practical experiences. We started this in-house training in September of this year, so 2 months ago. So we're nearly half of the training now. And at the beginning, it was difficult for the participants, so the professionals, to estimate the planned workload for the training. So when we outlined the training, you have to do this, you have to do that, then they were really a little bit stressed. So there was a slight resistance due to the expected overload, combined with the already high daily workload. I don't know how it's in your country, but at least in Germany, we have a lack of employees. We do not have enough employees in all the social services. So the ones that are working there, they are usually overworked. And when we came up with the idea, we have some nice ideas on how to learn digitality and media literacy, they were like, ooh, this also. But with further familiarization with the learning project, the participants were able to overcome this resistance, and they are now really motivated to implement their learning project, to go on with learning projects, which I think is caused by the really practice-oriented approach that we take. So they really can do it in their work time. So from the trainer's point of view, from the developer's point of view, the design training is going very well. We did these kind of trainings before in other institutions, in youth work institutions. And so we're quite familiar with this kind of resistance. So, that's too much. So finally, what's in it for you? If you go through this chapter, it offers you a training concept for professionals working with people with disability, and it addresses a relevant training need. I think we could agree digital inclusion is relevant. That has been developed with the involvement of relevant stakeholders. So it's really practice oriented. It's really elaborated in detail. You can find a lot of lists and overviews. We use a variety of methods, online and offline mode, synchronous and asynchronous teaching, individual and group work, and it can be economically implemented in the training practice. And as far as I think it's promising, both in its theoretical basis and its initial practical experience that we already have. I hope I have sold it to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Los. I think very informative chapter, and it's great that you have a lot of details. So it will be excellent for everywhere around the world. Just using your developed model. Thank you very much. Next person, Cindy. Thank you.
Okay, I might as well go next. I'm not working with special ed directly, but indirectly. My name's Cindy Klein Kennedy, and I'm located in New Mexico in the US. And my doctoral work was at Texas Tech in Lubbock. That's about 2 hours away. I've taught at the university level for a few years, but I've always been drawn back into public education. So I have been in public education as my district's instructional technology coordinator for the entire district for many, many years now. I have a love of technology and how it can be effectively integrated into the education process to enhance and or improve learning, and both for students as well as for teachers. And so that is my great love. And that's interesting that you worked in Holland. I actually spent 11 years in Holland, Lutz, so I was almost a neighbor of you too, in addition to a couple of the others. And so my chapter is entitled Teaching and Learning Online During a Pandemic. The overnight move to educational cyberspace lessons learned. So being in public education, my idea was to speak from the trenches, what we were actually dealing with. And so that's the overview. The town I live in and the district in which I work, it's a small town of about 40,000 people. We have 12 elementary schools. That is the ages about 5 to about 10 years old. So elementary, I know we're all from different countries and have different breaks and terms in education. Then we have 3 middle schools. Those are ages 12 to 15. And then a separate 9th grade, which are students about 14 years old, academy, where all of our schools, they filter into that one location. And then from that 9th grade academy, they go to our one high school that we have. And there's about 1,600 students in our high school. That's grades 9, 10, and 11, which are ages about 15 to 18. And so that's how we have a total enrollment of about just under 8,500 students. We have about 800 teachers and about 1,200 employees in total. So just to kind of give you a perspective what that looks like. We endured our pandemic by overnight. We went on spring break in 2020 and we never came back. And I'm sure that's true with many others. And what was so unique about that is that this happened worldwide. It was stunning. All of us were sitting here, our heads were spinning. What do we do? And those educators, we were rallying, trying to figure out, or how are we going to do this? Having worked in instructional technology for many years, that's my great love, but it's always been viewed, even though it's considered a very essential, an increasingly essential area in education, both skills and knowledge and strategies for integrating technology. It was always viewed more or less as icing on the cake. And I think I've got a number of international presentations in London and Paris consistently and around the United States. And it's so interesting to talk to educators because we have the same kind of problems, same sort of perspectives. It's amazing how small that world is. And so instructional technology, that's always been viewed as icing on the cake, but overnight it became like, that's all we had to hang on to. And so what we did is we had a district team, we rallied together and we made a plan. We were constantly communicating with our State Department of Education, as well as other states and what they were doing and planning and trying to figure out what we did. The future was an unknown, and I don't have to tell any of you that because everybody has undergone the same thing. So what we did, fortunately, we were a district who the year before had been able finally, after years of planning, to go to a one-to-one implementation. So each of our students had their own Chromebook that they could take home with them. And that was from pre-K up to 12th grade. And I don't know what we would have done if we didn't have that. There are many other districts around who were still using labs or They had devices that they were using, but only at in their school setting. And so a lot of other issues. So we did have that. We are a Google school. We're a Google entity. That means we had already been using Google Apps for Education, as it was called at the time, in our school district. And that was beginning to engage teachers through students, because as soon as students realized they could do all their work online, they really liked that. So the teachers were really kind of forced to become more technologically astute because the students were so engaged. Not just high performing students, but low performing students. We're also a district with a high poverty rate. So we had those issues to consider as well. A considerable portion, I would say probably about a fifth of our families did not have internet access. And so what we did together with our district leadership team, we came together. What do we need? We need to expand our infrastructure. So we literally took school buses, parked them in neighborhoods. Inside there, we put bridges, we put routers, and made Wi-Fi centers so families could walk up and sit down, drive up and sit down and have Wi-Fi access, since everything had to go online. Our teachers, again, overnight, they were all of a sudden really interested in technology. So I developed an ongoing learning plan from March of 2020 through that entire school year, providing real-time online trainings 3 times a day, and then once or twice a week in the evenings to families, because a lot of people did not have those skills. The students actually, as you know, students are not afraid of technology, even though they may not have acquired best practices and they don't know everything. They're willing, they have no fear of technology. They're willing to jump in and go for it. So that was encouraging for teachers. They were actually reaching out. So in working with training our teachers, we discovered so many interesting things, both positive and negative. Sorry, I just turned my screensaver on accidentally. We found that with that focused need, that we have a saying in English, of course, the necessity is the mother of invention. And that was very true for us. We've got to know this. So I'm getting online, I'm listening, I'm going to try this out. And so we discovered a lot of natively installed apps that we had never used before that could provide high quality recording, high quality video editing, so teachers could prepare better. We learned new strategies, especially for those teachers who were teaching music or physical education or other specialized tools, science teachers who were setting up little mini labs and doing experiments, and how do they communicate that with their teachers. So we had constant training. Our attendance was wonderful. Those teachers really, nobody can solve problems like teachers. For those of you who are in education, whether you're training teachers, they are so resourceful and they just roll up their sleeves and get busy and absorb what they need to reach those kids. We found, I could go on endlessly with stories about good things and bad things. We found also that some of our families who were floundering, we have a lot of Spanish speaking students and families. We have a lot of migrant families. And as we rolled out online training sessions using primarily Zoom and Google Meet, depending just upon what was being presented and how far along the development was. Google Meet was pretty bare bones when it started out, because it was not an app designed as Zoom was to virtually connect. But then they folded in all kinds of additional features. So we were going back and forth, whatever worked best for our families. And it was amazing to connect in the evenings with families. And there would be an entire family gathered around as I literally held a Chromebook and showed them what to do, talked to them, having a translator by my side to translate as needed. And it felt like we were in a war zone, you know, trying to gather together to figure out and solve these problems. What we learned is our students developed a unique ability to work independently, because sometimes their families could not help them with the technology. And so how do you collaborate with a group of students on this project that I'm doing? How do I illustrate something on a digital whiteboard and share that? And so they were very receptive in gaining new skills and technology, and as far as disabilities, it was really interesting to see some of our students who had struggled in classrooms, some of our students who were somewhere on the spectrum, pretty high functioning, but who would struggle in a classroom setting, they seem to actually thrive. They were focused, and when they were alone in their home, they seem to do really, really well in that virtual world, interestingly enough. And then, so we continued throughout with that training model, and outside the online live training sessions that we did, we actually invited regional schools in, because of a lot of smaller school districts around us. They had no one on staff. They were kind of making do with their own, a temporary individual who would come in and set up a network. And so they didn't really have much training. So we invited them in. So we would have sometimes these online sessions with up to 90 people. And that sounds like a lot, but you know what? Somehow it just flowed. And we would break out into rooms with focused groups or skill levels. And we just kind of did what was needed to get those skills out there, to get teachers comfortable so that they could effectively reach their students. And so I'm just sort of flipping through my chapter. I don't have a PowerPoint, as you see, to talk about some of those things. There is so much more that we can do. What we have learned since we've come back is that there's a bit of an elephant in the room, where these days we have a lot of parents who don't have parenting skills. Maybe they had their children very, very early. Maybe they're trying to survive on their own. Maybe their parents are raising their kids. And maybe mom is in jail, maybe dad's in prison. We have all kinds of dysfunctional families. We found that the importance of parents as the first educators, that became really, really apparent, especially since we've come back in person, which we are now. We're back full time in a regular schedule, but everyone has to wear masks. In fact, if somebody walks in the office, have to put it on. All of the students have to wear masks all the time, as do the teachers. But we have we found that we do have a lot of behavior problems. So we are actually addressing those now by developing some social emotional behavior programs that are specifically targeted, and to help some of those kids who have had to function on their own but are not doing it very well. And so we're dealing with a lot of those issues now that we speak. It's been interesting to see also how much of the technology gain that the teachers really had to learn overnight. They have come up with some of the most creative and innovative processes, lessons, projects for their students. And so it's become just an inherent part of that education process. If a student has to be gone, it's not a big deal, because everything can be done through Google Classroom, for example, and then so we can still communicate very easily virtually through Google Meet or Zoom. And so it's been quite a trip working in the trenches and trying to reach all those kids, especially little ones. That's been a great challenge. If you can imagine a little pre-K student, especially if they don't speak English, trying to get them set up with a Chromebook and get them logged on to their little program. So it's been quite a challenge, but it's been an exciting ride, and there's much to be done. This has really made very clear and evident some of the areas that need to be addressed, and that's what we're working on next.
Thank you so much, Sydney. I think you definitely from your chapter, we see a lot of resilience coming from the families and teachers. So that is great and excellent support. We have Mohammed want to go next. Can I just say, because we have another seven authors that want to present the chapters, just go with sticking to less than 10 minutes, please. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sumaya. I would like to thank everybody for inviting me part of this wonderful collection of scholars. I am delighted. And my name is Mohammed Ibrahim. I am a professor here at Arkansas Tech University. I would like to share with you the screen first to the book chapter was really a collection of some ideas I worked on for the last 12 years. It's not something new. I just developed some kind of a new framework that can make use of some of the theoretical frameworks used over the time. I'm director of the Master of Education in Instructional Technology and Design, and this is why my interest as Cindy, that when you work with technology, it's a love story more than job. So we love what we do, and we feel like we're part of the movement in the United States to move the new generation to love technology and to attach to it. So the book, the idea came after the COVID-19. Most of the universities, they were struggling, most of them, because they don't have infrastructure to start working with to deal with the COVID-19. Therefore, it was a massive amount of workshops and training for a lot of teachers and professors across the nation, across the globe, actually, to try to help them to help the students in their teaching. So the book idea was not something new. The idea has been triggered by that a lot of teachers, they were unfamiliar with the correct pedagogy for remote teaching. Everyone was struggling with this, with exception only for people who used to teach online before. The other teachers, they have difficulty to mitigate the students' social isolation. They can deliver the content, but they cannot use the proper pedagogy to try to help the students remotely. So this was actually the motivation to write the chapter. To initiate the discussion about this issue, like I said, this was accumulation of work I did for the last 12 years. Based on research, hard science, hard research, collect data, and then I saw if some of these frameworks work or not with my students. The other purpose was the technology integration process to be inclusive and intentional and also collaborative. It's not enough to use technology in isolation from the major idea of reaching out for every student, and also to be systematically, intentionally using the technology for specific topics, and also to include the collaboration between all the students and the content and the professor. So the three frameworks I used in the chapter, as I mentioned before, they are not my invention. These are solid frameworks used before, but we try to use them in a new framework. The first one is Universal Design for Learning. The second one is the TPACK, and the third one is Professional Learning Community. So we'll try in this chapter really to encourage teachers to apply research-based, not just because there are some new trend out there, but since I based my chapter on solid research for the last 12 years, I try to share this information through the chapter. So here are the three frameworks, which TPACK, UDL, and the PLC. The PLC will focus mainly on collaboration, and the TPACK about intentional, how to use the technology in connection with the pedagogy and then content knowledge. And then the UDL also deals with the accessibility and inclusiveness for the students. So the first one just focused on how to use the UDL in every assignment and every content you are delivering. So for example, using multiple means of representation. It's not enough just to talk about, I have a textbook and I'm gonna scan the book and put it online. I'm expecting the students to read the book. This is not the proper of UDL. You need to make sure you have multiple means of representation. It means that you can include video, animation, graphics, text, you name it, because our students are not unified. We have visual learners, we have kinesthetic learners, and so on. So we need to reach out for them by giving them multiple means of representations. The second is providing the students with multiple means of action. It's not only to pass a test, it has to be different ways of interacting with the content, either by recording voice, recording video, writing papers, and so on. It's not enough just one type of action. The final basic foundation of the UDL is allowing students to express their knowledge differently. It's not only through, as I mentioned before, like a test or exam, but they can make a PowerPoint presentation, they can record video, and so on. This is one of the most important parts when we're teaching online after COVID. that we need to diversify the ways we present the content and also allow students to present their knowledge. The second framework is the TPACK, which also very solid framework since 2006. And it's the interaction or interplay between the three different knowledges. And like I said before, these are solid before, but we just included in the my framework: content knowledge, pedagogical knowledge, and technological knowledge. Most of the time, people they like the technology and they said, I'm going to use it, but they don't know that they need to make sure that technology is driven by the pedagogy, not the vice versa. So this is one of the things I explained in the chapter in details. The last one is Proficient Learning Community, which basically we try to make sure that the teachers, when they found something good and they know that they can successfully applying some of the content, they need to share this with other teachers. So this was the Proficient Learning Community. It's actually, it's like us, we can talk together about what technology we can use in the classroom successfully, to share ideas about the best practices, to find and share technology tools and so on. And this is actually has been recommended by ST and NIST that continually improve their practice by learning from and with others and exploring proven, promising practices. This is the whole premise of the PLC. And therefore, I talked about this also on how different techniques can be used in the classroom. That's it. And I would like to, just 1 second, I would like to show with you where I am from. I'm from Russellville, Arkansas. It's a small town. It's about maybe 20,000. The school is about 12,000. So we are half of the town. It's a university town. It's in Arkansas, and it's about 10 minutes from my home. So this is in the River Valley of Arkansas, very nice area. As you can see, the area is very nice, surrounding with mountains. I would like you if you can come and visit us one day. It's about maybe 1 hour and 15 minutes from Little Rock, Arkansas, which is the capital of the state. It's also very nice and very small town comparing to New York and other cities. So, and this is, again, the last thing I'm going to share with you guys is my, this is the school. I am here since 2011. Before that, I was in Oklahoma, and total, I spent about 28, 29 years here in the United States. I'm originally from Egypt, but I consider Arkansas is my home now. By saying that, I think I conclude my, my presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. It was really good, and thanks for inviting us. We have, I think, Michelle, because yes, it was in the chat that you said that you want to be next. So do you want to go next, please?
Thank you very much. It's a great privilege to be part of this book launch, and I thank Professor Levin for inviting me to contribute the chapter. I'm Michael, and I'm currently a doctoral researcher in Southwest University, China. And the meeting started around 3 a.m. for me, so forgive me for my face. I'll just go straight into my presentation. It's a PowerPoint presentation. So, hello, can you see my screen? Okay. So my chapter is captioned "A Perfect Marriage for the Millennials in Higher Education, COVID-19 and Blended Learning," and it follows what has been presented in, I think, the 2 previous presentations. And by a perfect marriage, I mean looking at the current event of the COVID-19 pandemic and how it had a devastating effect on higher education and education as a whole globally. It is now the time for developing countries, such as where I originally come from, Ghana, to embrace technology in education. And in the past, this has been met with a lot of resistance. But as
Sorry, Michael, I can't hear you well. Is there a problem
Hello?
for others? Or yes, I can't
Hello?
hear you well. Maybe others.
Yeah, it's got a bit of reflection of the sounds. Yes.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes.
Oh, okay, okay,
better.
okay, okay, sorry. Yeah, so by a perfect marriage, I mean in the event of the COVID-19 pandemic and how it wreaked havoc on education globally, it is time for developing countries to embrace technology in education. And in most countries, developing countries, especially from the sub-Saharan African region, online learning, e-learning, and other forms of technology which are being used in education has been met with a lot of resistance because of faculty not accepting this mode of instruction and students not being privy to how this kind of instruction goes. So by the COVID-19 affecting our, in a positive vein, is a catalyst for some of these institutions to accept this mode of instruction, such as online learning and blended learning and flipped learning and all the kinds of learning modalities which are being conducted by the use of technology. So millennials, they are being defined in research as those who were born from 1980 to 2000. And according to researchers, this group of people are the largest body who are in higher education at the present moment. And we all know about this COVID-19 and how it had spillover effect on economy, health, and also education. So before, by the time I conclude, we will get all these keywords. And first, I make a case on why these millennials, I think they were born during the time when the World Wide Web was introduced. So researchers call them names such as digital natives or the instant messaging generation. And they are able to use a lot of media. They have phones and other handheld devices. So it is a very great time for educators and school leaders in higher education institutions to capitalize on this, capitalize on their use of technology for them to embrace online learning, e-learning, and distance education and blended learning. But in my presentation and in my chapter, I make a case for blended learning. And it's more of a scoping review research. So blended learning is being interrelated with concepts as e-learning, flipped learning, and distance education. It deals with a combination of both face-to-face learning and also online learning. And the main goal is to make the learning interactive, independent, and also collaborative. So this is just a definition of blended learning. Just to give a background context, in Ghana, where I used as a case study, although my research focused on other countries in the sub-Saharan African region, I used Ghana as a case study because that's where I come from. We were used to face-to-face learning, which is the traditional mode of classroom instruction before the COVID-19 setting. And I'm in China, and I could attest to how it was it caused anxiety. So there were school closures just as in other places, and we Ghana were forced to adopt online learning because we were not used to that, not accustomed to that. Because we are not accustomed to that, there were a lot of challenges that this institution faced. So the government decided that it will resume partial on-site for some of the final year students in some high schools in the country. So partial on-site resumption also happened. So there is the educational hierarchy in Ghana. We have the junior high school, the basic level, which include the junior high school. We have the senior high school and the universities. All of these levels were closed, depending on level. So about 500 tertiary education students, the focus of my presentation. They also were affected by the school closure. So online learning emerged as a panacea. However, there were some challenges that Ghana and other countries in the sub-Saharan African region face. So basically, during the online learning in Ghana, for those at the primary level, they stayed at home and watched content on TV. And those at the secondary level, they were using WhatsApp and also some resources that they could use, like educational resources, books, and that were distributed to them. But because of the challenges, they were invited to school, especially the final year students. Vocational schools were closed, and universities were basically the institution that engage in the online learning. But we have National Association of Ghanaian Students. They call the online learning as challenge ready. And there were challenges with bundles, and there were no laid out framework to implement the e-learning because it was emergent. And needy students were finding it difficult to get access to ICT tools to learn, and also money to buy internet bundles. So these are just some statements, such as from the UNESCO and some studies that I did, that all retreat that internet access is a problem in Ghana and other developing countries in the sub-Saharan African region. There's a digital divide and also problem with accessing ICT equipment. So in my chapter, I present blended learning as an educational innovation or a game changer for such institutions who embrace online learning and have difficulties. Blended learning is more cost effective and also has a facial aspect to it. Since my research was a scoping review, there was a literature search on most of the online databases. And there was some inclusion criteria set, and then I did some literature analysis which focused on three main points, which is the significance of blended learning in the COVID-19 pandemic. So I look at studies which were done since 2020 on blended learning and COVID-19, and I look at how blended learning can be integrated into higher education, and also a laid out framework for developing countries in sub-Saharan African region. So these are just some statements and reports from other researchers. That all points to the fact that blended learning was very important or effective during the COVID-19 inspired online learning. Most institutions had difficulties, so we tried online learning. Other institutions such as those in Italy were using online blended learning already. So we just went or referred back to it, and it was found to be very effective. And when how to integrate, one researcher gave 3 key points, which is the learning outcome should be clearly set, and assessment techniques should be linked with how faculty accept it, and also learning should be, the implementation should focus on student satisfaction and engagement. And on my framework on how to adopt this blended learning in Ghana and also other African countries, I look at a framework which is more contextualized. If you look at studies on blended learning, we normally use the technology acceptance model, but because of this COVID-19, it calls for a framework of implementation that is more contextualized. So I did not use the technology acceptance model or the theory of action, but a recent one in 2020, which was tested in Ghana. And it focused on 3 main points, which is institutional readiness. The institution has to be ready. The faculty has to be trained to accept this blended learning modality of instruction. And the pedagogy has to be structured in a way that helps or facilitate blended learning, promote acceptance and interest in students. And when this is done, it will be easily implemented and it will be successful, because there is no one size fits all approach to blended learning. So why is blended learning important? I'm concluding because in Ghana, we can, because of the facial aspects, it can, those who are, we have a lot of students in the universities and the facility is very small to accommodate them. So instead of the multi-track approach system, which is being used in Ghana, where they are separated in groups, batches, and one group stays at home and the other group come to school and they switch during the academic calendar. Blended learning affords those who are at home to study online, while those who are at school have facial interaction with their teachers. And this is very cost effective, and it's also a way of optimizing teaching and promoting acceptance online assessment. And it's efficient because the online learning is 80% and face-to-face is also 20%. Promotes self-regulated learning also. And smaller class size. I can't talk more about the multi-track approach because of time, but it's also help in maintaining social distancing because if there is some group of students at school and others are at home studying online, the number of students at the school premises reduces and they are able to prevent overcrowding, thereby maintaining the social distancing that is advocated by who. And as many studies have reviewed, students increase on blended learning risk of 19 times, especially, I think this study was done in India, which also has a similar context like Ghana. So this is the end of my presentation. This blended learning is the way to go, a game changer and educational innovation in this extraordinary times. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We had a bit of difficulty hearing you at some stage. Sydney has a question. She couldn't hear you. That where in China are you located?
Oh, sorry, I don't know. I'm in Chongqing. Chongqing is one of the most populated cities in China. I think even around the world, it's the second largest or the largest. So we are 36 million, which is like the my country, Ghana. Now I think we are 33 million, but previously we used to be 36 million. So Chongqing alone is 36, and the district I am, the Ibrahim district, is 4 million in total. Just here alone, we are 4 million. Sometimes we step out and there are lots of people, you don't get a place to put your leg. Yeah. So.
Thank you. Next, Garfield asked me to can go next.
Thank you.
That's okay.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? Great. Okay. I'm coming to you from just north of Toronto in Canada. I'm an associate professor at the University of Toronto at OISE, which is the Faculty of Education. And there'll be an intersection, I think some interesting intersections of the chapters presented. My primary area of work is in the field of critical thinking, and I teach a course in sustained inquiry and creativity. So my primary area is how do we get at infusing thinking as a way of learning for all children. But the chapter we look at is one on assessment. I also teach graduate courses in assessment. So it's going to be the kind of intersection of those pieces. I also do a lot of work with schools across Canada and internationally, including Robert College in Istanbul, where we work with staff on how do we both invite thinking, but also build the capacity in students to engage in thinking. So I'm going to try to be very efficient. The chapter we contributed, we called it Powerful Instruction and Powerful Assessment, and we were playing with the analogy of learning as a double helix. Talked to our daughter who has a degree in neuroscience and asked her if that analogy seemed to work, and she seemed to think that it did. And I'll explain where we came up with the analogy in just a moment. But the impetus for the chapter, first of all, begins from clarifying among educators and make sure we understand the difference between assessment and evaluation, which are too often used interchangeably. The word assessment actually comes from the Latin to mean to sit alongside, to sit beside. And that is fundamentally different than evaluation, which is to sit in judgment. And we wanted to look at a reconceptualizing of the relationship between instruction and assessment so that they are seamlessly woven together in a way that guides students in their learning. So moving from periodic judgments of students to sitting alongside to learn. And that distinction kind of sits at the core. And then looking at how can we make better use of ongoing integrated assessments to genuinely promote student agency. And by agency, both the desire to learn and the capacity to learn. Sorry, my slide got thrown off here. So this idea of the double helix of learning is that there are two strands in learning that rather than see them as separate, and often we see in classrooms that we instruct, we teach content, we teach, we pause, and then we'll have a quiz or some kind of assessment. We mentioned in the chapter, certainly in Canada, virtually every Ministry of Education, the assessment branch is separate from the curriculum or instruction branch. At the university I teach at, I teach an assessment course versus a methods course. All of these seem odd to me in that instead of seeing these as parallel structures, we need to see them as intersecting structures. So that assessment instruction are the interplay that happens seamlessly within learning. And as we thought about it, and our daughter pointed out, she said, Dad, when you think about a DNA strand, hydrogen bonds are the key to building that strength. And we said, well, in education, those are the relationships. How do we build and ensure that assessment builds strong relationships that help that assessment instruction? Kids have to believe that the work I'm doing is in their best interest. I just did a session a week ago on assessment as kindness. How do we reimagine assessment, not as a stress-inducing, anxiety-creating exercise, but one that generally supports learners? And then how do we, and I notice there's another chapter in the book dealing with the art and science of teaching. How do we use those tools and strategies so that they support the intersection of assessment and instruction? So in a very quick summary of it, we touch on kind of 4 key areas that if we want to truly engage and empower learners, you'll notice it begins with that thinking is the foundation for learning. And that intersects with virtually everything I've heard here today. How do I use technology in a critically thoughtful way? How do I use UDL to promote rich thinking? Like for me, they intersect constantly. So the foundation that students are learning transferable competencies and concepts that they can use in everyday context, that thinking drives the learning. The second part that we played with in the chapter, how do we get at learning through sustained critical inquiry? So notice I'm adding 2 distinctions, not just inquiry, but inquiry that invites deep, rich thinking, and that is sustained over time so that kids can play around, test ideas, revisit them. To do that, our third item, how do we promote what we call iterative learning so that students can test an answer, do some additional learning, get some ongoing guidance? You'll notice in the box in the bottom, we start to introduce certain innovations to support this. Learning launches, as opposed to hooks or minds on, learning launches are invitations for students to try and answer in response to a provocation. One that we've used, for example, if you know the movie Guardians of the Galaxy, in a biology class, we asked students, is Groot more plant or animal? And they had to take a position on a dashboard. Is he more plant or more animal? As they learned, they could revisit and change their answer. So the idea of a learning launch, provocative questions, try out an answer. As you learn, how would you change your answer? We have the idea of thought books where students have a place to park their ideas, to make notes that's safe. There's no judgment happen. Just park your idea. We'll revisit it later. And the final piece in this, nurturing students as reflective learners. So using thought books again, and I'll just go to the last page in my quick summary. We've been playing with something we call a guide to success, which is, in my view, a better form of a rubric, because rather than copying 4 different levels, we focus on what are the basic requirements to complete a task. How will we know when excellence has been achieved? And then we invite the student to self-reflect on what's going well and where they could use additional guidance. And the teacher then is responsive to the student request for guidance. So these 4 pages, the rocket is my launch, the guide success. Sustained inquiry is achieved through what we call a cascading approach to planning curriculum, where a rich overarching question and rich tasks are set out first, and then we carefully sequence a series of sub-inquiries that help students unpack the richer inquiry, and through a series of lessons, they go deeper and deeper. And the sketch you see at the top is a student's thought book where the grade 2 child was planning an enclosure to keep a baby animal safe and healthy. And every time they learn, they're invited to go back into their thought book and make new notes, new ideas, and so on. By the way, again, the intersection with the technology chapters. So think about the opportunities for digital thought books, using OneNote, using Seesaw, are all kinds of wonderful opportunities. So that's the essence of our chapter, is a rethinking and a reimagining of the role that assessment and instruction should play in supporting student learning, and practical and innovative ways teachers can rethink how they plan and deliver curriculum so that we can get at that deep learning and potential. So I hope that was under 10 minutes. It was a quick overview, and if it intrigued you, hopefully the chapter will be of interest to you.
That was great, Garfield. Thank you very much. Very interesting area that you're touching about assessment and evaluation. So next is Jamie that want to present. Please hand it to you.
Yes, let's see. Okay, so can you see the presentation? Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So I am Dr. Jamie Coyne. I also have my co-presenters, Dr. May Lane. She actually just had to leave. Dr. Tori Hollis. She is actually on this call, and also Dr. Christine Ellis. So we are from Sam Houston State. We are from the College of Education. So a little bit about our university. We are located north of Houston, Texas, and we have about 20,000 students, undergraduate and graduate. And we are the largest probably colleges within Sam Houston is Criminal Justice and College of Education. So we are known in Texas for preparing teachers. And so we, in fact, teach we teach undergraduate and graduate, Dr. Hollis, Dr. Lane. Dr. Ellis she is actually the director of our accreditation. So she does the teacher certification. So also wanted to tell you a little bit about the inspiration for this chapter. We're also part of what's called 4+1 Teach, and it was funded by the Department of Education, and in which students would go through the traditional approach of going through the teaching program, but instead of doing student teaching, they actually did an internship, and while receiving a master's degree, and it was paid for by the Department of Ed. And so wanted to kind of share 2 lenses. So through this chapter, we, of course, we wanted to, like many, talk about how we actually taught and helped and nurture others that were going through the pandemic as far as teaching. For this chapter, it became very reflective. We started thinking about how we could even improve. How can we help others? And it was very therapeutic. So we wanted to help others that might still be going through the pandemic. I'm not sure about where you're at, but we are still, of course, feeling some of the things that are going with the pandemic. We do have some schools that are still online as far as K through 12 schools. So as you know, we've talked a little bit about, so many students, 1.57 billion students were faced, with being in the, having to go through school, whether if it's K through 12 school or higher ed, of how to actually, accomplish, how to learn, how to keep up with schoolwork, but also the teachers that have been impacted. So I like what Fisher and Frey have called what's called crisis teaching. So I liked it termed, it was more of like, okay, this is emergency. We've got to do what we can. We've got to do the best we can. And so in order to reach as many students as we can. So we had teachers that had limited, and also higher ed. So when I say teachers, I also mean higher ed. They had limited professional development and training, variety of experience with technology. So we had some teachers who had very limited, they're like, I like face-to-face teaching. I'm not sure even how to set up a Zoom meeting. And then you had some that, could set up, a Google Classroom, really easily. And also, I know that some of you work with teachers in pre-service. We also were experiencing, how do we ensure these teachers get field experience? And so, and I know there was a need for developing some type of simulated experience. So we really had to rethink how we ensured students felt connected and engaged. And so I am only going to summarize this. If you want to know more, read the chapter, but wanted to talk about how we could help. So making connections. It's very important for teachers and higher ed individuals to make connections, really get to know your students. And this was very, very hard for us. And so we ended up using like our 4+1 students that again they are what are called first year teachers. They're doing an internship, teacher of record. We had to find ways to really get to know them, because not only were they taking graduate classes, but they were also in their first year of teaching. So try to imagine being a first year teacher trying to deal with, oh my gosh, I'm completely online, and I'm also dealing with now graduate work that is completely online. And so we found ways. We would have Saturday sessions where it was professional development, where we ensured we kind of got to know them. And informally they have we all have some research classes that we're working with them, but we have also called full release mentors. And so these are individuals that are instructional coaches, retired principals, and they actually would help mentor the students virtually using like Swivel and using Zoom meetings. Also providing career aspirations, guidance, and mentoring. As first year teachers, they just wanted to cry. They're like, most first year teachers cry usually about October. But with the pandemic, with it happening in March, they just were like, oh my gosh, why did I get into teaching? I'm failing my students. And so we had to really help mentor them. And then looking at the higher ed, we had a lot of individuals who are face-to-face instructors. And we're like, I don't know how to teach online. And so we had to help guide them, whether if it was showing them creating like a model, like I'd say, I've taught this class online, or here's some strategies to help them, creating an inclusive environment. And also, like Garfield had said, providing specific feedback. I think this was key because, when you're doing a face-to-face class, you're able to really explain, hey, I get what you're saying, but have you thought about this? And so, and I get this a lot from students too. They'll say, you know what? Some of the professors, they just put like, great job. That doesn't give me any help, providing specific feedback on how they can improve. I can't tell you how many times we would actually sit with students, via Zoom and say, hey, this is what you need help in. Let me give you an example. Also making sure that you're approachable. We would have virtual office hours, but we also had what are called like open Zoom sessions. So we'd say, okay, we are going to be on Zoom at such and such time. And for like our ones that were teachers, our 4+1 teachers, we actually did it on Saturdays. And we'd say, hey, we're going to be open. Come have a question if you need help, or if you just need someone to guide you. You have a question, you have a classroom management issue, you need some guidance on. And that they felt free to just come in. And I also think it was just too, they felt isolated. So knowing that a professor was there to be like, you know what, they're there, they will be there if I have a question, and just actively listen to the students. Also ensuring that students are treating fairly and respectfully. We never know what students are going through, especially with the pandemic. We at our university have a lot of first gen students and a lot of non-traditional students. So individuals, they are the breadwinner for their class, for their family. And they're like, oh my gosh, I don't know how I'm going to do this. Or maybe their husband lost their job, or their wife lost their job. Having to understand, what, let's give them a little grace. Let's, try to understand their perspective. And a lot also had children that were going through the K-12 classroom who are like, oh my gosh, now I also got to work it with my child at home. How am I going to do this? How am I going to balance it? Never assume what students are going through. They do not, especially some of the, students have gone through different circumstances. Everyone has their own experience. Also, we ensure that, everyone is treated fairly and was respectfully. Find opportunities to interact. So kind of like using like Socrative or using Kahoot, we found ways to get them to interact. You can create these games. So like if we're having a Zoom, we could do like we did like a scavenger hunt or something that they had ways to interact. We ensure that our communication is clear and consistent. Every voice matters and that we learn from each other. Some other tips, self-care for instructors. I think as a teacher, we always put everyone first and we put ourselves last. And so I think a lot of times teachers learn this the hard way. Creating boundaries, knowing that, at a certain time, I am not going to check my emails. I am going to worry about my family. I'm going to worry about myself. Reflection, and also providing that, that grace for yourself, knowing you're going to make mistakes and that is okay. That's how you learn. Also, Zoom fatigue. Social cues can be harder to notice. So if you're doing a class that's virtual, understanding, are they understanding it? Are they getting it? It creates a lot of fatigue. And I don't know about you, but I felt like when the invention with Zoom meetings, we had a lot more of meetings. So that also created fatigue. And then just be consistent with your expectations. Be clear with what you expect. We would also create videos. So like we would also be available virtually, but we would also create videos because I really think that they just need that experience, that personal experience. Dr. Hollis, did you want to share anything? I did that really quick because again, it's a summary of the chapter, but Dr. Hollis, did you want to share anything?
No, just that I everything that Dr. Coyne said just highlights our experiences over the past 18 months to 2 years. And it's been a learning experience, that's for sure. As I'm sure it was for all of you.
Well, and like we were in that unique position where a lot of you who are preparing teachers. You've got novice teachers, first year teachers trying to help prepare them. How do you teach an online class versus, and then also teaching your own class and how to help others, migrate. But, the most important thing is communication too. Even just sending emails to your students, letting them know, hey, I'm here. I am here to help you, and looking at their perspective. So hope that helps. Oh, also in the chapter gave some examples of like, when we were talking about formative assessment, looking at like feedback, gave an example of how you could use feedback in the class. So I hope that helps too. So anyway, I wanted to keep it short because I knew we were short on time, but thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Jamie and Tori and May, for this great presentation. I would say that's really supportive to our students. We always talk about teaching pedagogy and curriculum and strategy, but this was really well support for the student. Thank you. Next, we have John to present a chapter, please. Thank you.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. John Essington. I'm a professor of education at a small liberal arts college in Illinois. So I am a couple hours south of Srimani. So I'm very aware of where Joliet is. If you want to know where Carlinville, Illinois is, we are basically in between St. Louis, Missouri and Chicago. If you're going from one to the other, you go right by us. So my background does kind of play a role into why I chose to write a chapter called Balancing the Art and Science of Teaching, because I was previously a secondary social studies teacher, and I went from teaching that full-time to the very next semester being a full-time university professor and teaching future educators. So a lot of my research and theoretical studies goes into how the ideas that we teach our educators are practically used in classrooms, because I was just coming out of the K through 12 environment when I started teaching teachers. So I still had a bit of an understanding of, okay, what is it really like to be in the classrooms with these students? So that's that's been guiding what I've been thinking about. And then I was reading a book right before I started thinking about this chapter called Uncommon Sense Teaching. And one of the very first ideas that's brought up in the book is how the authors suggest that we're finally getting away from the idea that teaching is an art, and that it is actually more of a science. And I think that really sparked some interest in me to kind of understand this idea of how teaching can become a science rather than an art. I really am interested into like neuroscience and neuroeducation. I don't know much about it, but it's a very interesting field that I've been trying to find more about. And then I think that kind of leads to this, there's this idea that technology and what we're finding about the brain is leading to the idea of a technocratic teacher, where we utilize checklists. And if you can follow these checklists, you can become a very strong educator. And what I've noticed in classrooms and working with student teachers and other educators and just experience within classrooms is that teaching as much technology as we use as tools and that can enhance teaching, there is still a tremendous amount of art that goes into teaching. And I started the chapter off with an example from when I was teaching, and I had a student teacher in my classroom. And this individual, he was fantastic with analyzing data. He could disaggregate tests. He could go right down his checklist that he had to do for his teaching program. He'd go down the checklist that we had for our district, that you had to have agendas, and you had to have the date of attendance. You had a homework section. You had all these sections that had to be up every single day. It was our checklist. And then when he got in front of the class to teach, it was a very rough lesson to watch, because it was the first time he was teaching. And what he realized was that this checklist approach to teaching does not prepare you for interacting with individuals. And I noticed this with the idea of the neuroscience, and this idea that if we understand how the brain works, teaching then becomes almost a type of activity that doesn't require a skill or an art to benefit students. So throughout this chapter, what I was kind of looking at were all of these different ideas and maybe some of the gaps where this has begun. I think, at least in the United States, this idea really started to come up with a teacher shortage. How do we fill these positions? Well, we give them checklists. It also came about at the turn of the century with the No Child Left Behind, where all schools were now going to be held accountable for the school scores of their children. And it became, okay, go through the content as fast as you can. And that's how we're going to evaluate how you do, is how well you do on a test score. So it became less about delving deeply with students and understanding and building relationships and seeing them grow, to here's a list of what you have to cover, now test it and then retest it. So we got to this idea of teaching wasn't about relationships and how you combine different aspects. It became more of just follow these simple steps and you can become an excellent teacher. Another area that I talk about in the chapter is, and it became popular, it's been around for a while, but became a large idea, at least in American education, with the data-driven educator or the data-driven school. The interesting aspect with this, and in some of the research that I was finding, is that it automatically places students second because the data is more important than the students. And that's the interesting idea of how we use these tools and these scientific tools to help us teach, but it is not the aspect of teaching, because it's, instead of enhancing, now we're overlooking the individual students. And I think it's an interesting idea that I look at in the chapter, I feel, because it's kind of juxtaposed to this idea of, we're also understanding now that learners are different. People learn at different paces. They process information at different speeds. So half of our professional development is spent on understanding the diversity, the inclusiveness of students, and how all these students are different. They come from different backgrounds. And then the other half of PD is how we have to standardize everything. So it's kind of this ironic twist of teaching that we're being told to standardize everything, while at the same time being told that everyone's different. So it was an interesting idea of how to use science as more of the tool, and kind of moving away from this idea that that teaching is simply a science. I think it kind of brings us back to the idea of, when we're using information and checklists, we're aggregating all of these ideas and we're creating generalities for students and for what's the best mode of teaching that don't necessarily fit with in-class instruction, right? Like knowing that an entire class scored a certain level doesn't necessarily make me teach one specific individual student better. It may make me teach them worse. This mythical average student, it's a made-up student that doesn't exist in our classrooms. And that's what the science is wanting us to teach to, is to this average student that probably isn't in your class because they're either above that or below that level. So I think it's the overall idea of this chapter is wanting to, it's not necessarily a counterpoint to scientific teaching, but it's this idea of we have to find this balance, because teaching is still an act of humanity rather than an act of like a technocratic method of how to teach. So that was, I wanted to be brief. I know I'm towards the end and everyone's probably ready to go. So there's more in the chapter if you feel the need to read that. So thank you for this opportunity, and I look forward to hearing a little bit more.
Thank you so much, John. It was really interesting. I like you say that teaching is not a checklist, it's more art. Really good point. Thank you. We have two more presenters that to go. Michael, would you like to be next?
Sure. I'll go next. I just wanted to thank everybody. I'm feeling very inadequate because all of the presentations have been so superlative. I've been very, very impressed by everyone's work. My chapter was on critical issues, concerns, and directions in modern pedagogy. And mine is just kind of a reiteration of some of the main points that everyone else has said. So I'll try to keep it brief. I know time is short, but we have all been dealing with this disaster. We really didn't have a disaster or contingency plan. And all of a sudden we have been inundated with these different LMS, learning management systems. We've been having to deal with a new organizational structure. Let's talk about the need for training. And I think we need to delve into that a little bit more. We have to look at face-to-face training, these tutorials, these snippets, these YouTube types of training to see which is the most effective, efficient methodology for training instructors. In terms of these LMSs, we have to look at the subtle nuances of how deeply these LMSs can provide data and feedback to students, as well as documentation about the student performance and student engagement. We want to have students engaged, we want to have them learning, and we want to do it effectively, while at the same time never forgetting, as John just pointed out, the emotional, affective elements, the feeling part of the educational process, the relationship between people, and still the need for face-to-face instruction in some areas like music, art, dance, theater, drama, and even teaching, because good teachers are always modeling and the students imitate good teachers. We need to look at, again, delivery. What's the most effective way to deliver? We have some experience now with MediaSite. We have a lot of experience with Zoom. But even Zoom, we need to look at how best to use it and how often. We don't want Zoom fatigue. The other thing about Zoom is we're able now to have conferences and learn from each other, as we have been doing today in this presentation. We're dealing with some, on one hand, complex issues, while at the other hand, trying to keep things simple, structured, so that students can learn best. Within that realm, we need to look at elements that help with the learning process. On one hand, rubrics, and I published a paper on the fact that rubrics are not magic. They are not miracles. They are guidelines that we have that we can use. And there have been a number of excellent presentations today about assessment and the alignment of assessment and formative, summative assessment, and how to be kind, as someone pointed out. I think that that was a great thing. A couple other challenges of the current environment or zeitgeist. There's a lot of open access challenges. A lot of faculty members are concerned about impact factor, the quality peer review. And I think to almost summarize, because I know time is short, the need for ongoing professional development, the need for ongoing lifelong learning, we have to inculcate or discuss even further. We want to look at all students, but in particularly gifted, talented, and creative, because they need a certain different type of enrichment and acceleration. Two last things I want to mention: the need to provide feedback to students. And we've just begun to scratch the surface as to the different types of feedback, the different kinds of feedback, quality feedback, and not just good, well done, excellent. So there's what we call hard and soft kind of feedback, where we go into depth and try to do some remediation with some students. The other last thing is we need to have ongoing research about all of the things that have been discussed today, while at the same time dealing with student stress and our stress. Because I think we've been through a lot of stress, we're still going through a lot of stress, and I think we have to recognize the impact that this stress has on students and on faculty. And I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. It was really good to hear you. Very encouraging for ongoing research. We have our last person that want to present, Martin.
He's our colleague. There is no more presenter.
Okay, that's good. Thank you so much. Do you want to go to the last talk, Melville, please?
Okay. Thank you very much to you all. And I would like to thank you again, Sumeyye, for organizing this event tonight. And we are thankful to all contributors, to all chapter authors, and hope to meet you in new projects. And as I mentioned before, I would like to invite you to Konya for June conference, and we'll be happy to see you there.
Thank you, Melville. I have to say it was very interesting to come up with a set time that it suits everyone around the world. We have, here in Australia, 4th of November, and I have to wake up early in the morning, 5:30, but I try to be kind to everyone, not interrupt with the sleep. And it was good to meet everyone's here. Yeah, and I hope for more future collaboration with you all around the world. Thank you. And I will send this recording to everyone.